Hey guys, this video is going to go on our how to do stuff in Japan playlist, and it might be the first of a couple of videos on the topic because we've sort of touched on the topic before, but we do get usually private messages from people saying what about this and what about this, and this week we got a private message from somebody saying that she is engaged to a Japanese person and there's a situation and what should she do. And our response to her was that if you're going to marry a Japanese person, then your communication needs to be really good, because you're going to have a lot of challenges to get through and you're going to need really good communication to be able to sort those things out. So you need to start now with this particular topic. So in other words, our advice to her was to talk to the fiance about it. And then that sort of triggered, because this is the sort of questions we do get. And of course, we do know people who are married to foreigners, Japanese people who are married to foreigners, and we know Japanese people who were married to foreigners. We know foreigners who were married to Japanese people. So we've seen lots of examples of it and what works and what doesn't work. So because of that, maybe it might be of use to somebody if we talk about these topics. So we might do a couple of videos about this, but this first one, just to sort of clarify a couple of things right away, is of course we know some Japanese people who are married to foreigners and they have reasonably happy relationships, of course. And of course not everybody is the same, and all these sort of things depend on the individuals involved, of course. However, there are some complications with having relationships between Japanese people and foreigners that make it even more difficult than normal relationships. So usually our advice, and when I say our in this case it refers to my wife and I, my Japanese wife and I. Usually if people ask us, you know, what's it like being married to a foreigner, usually she says it's really difficult, which is a fair call, and I usually say the same thing, but I also usually follow it up if the person's thinking about it, because sometimes you do meet Japanese people who say, oh, it'd be interesting to meet a foreigner, and it'd be interesting to have a foreign boyfriend. And you know, we've done interview videos about this before with asking Japanese people if they want a foreign boyfriend or girlfriend, if they want a foreign husband or wife. And most of them actually say they don't want a foreign husband and wife. It is actually pretty rare. There are some foreigners who like to believe that Japanese people really love foreigners and really want a foreign partner, and in particular our American friends often tell us how Japanese people love Americans, and you might have seen in our interview series, it's just not true. When we ask them, would you like a foreign boyfriend or girlfriend, some of them say yes, and then when we ask them, would they want a foreign husband or wife, they say no. And usually it's because they want some free English practice. That's usually it, and or just to experience the different cultural experience of having spending time with a foreigner. But when it comes to actually getting married, no, they don't want to marry a foreigner. And even the people in those interviews seem to recognise that it's because the cultural differences make it so difficult, and the language differences as well. So usually our advice to first off, just want to start talking about this topic by saying this. Our advice is, if you can avoid it, you know, it's difficult enough to have good relationships anyway, but to as you will see when we talk about this topic, there are a lot of things about this different cultural difference thing that makes it really, really difficult. So for those people who sort of have this, you know, I'd love a Japanese husband, I'd love a Japanese wife, well, we'd encourage you to give it some serious thought first, because what often happens now, so we've talked about, of course, there are some people who, you know, Japanese people who are married to foreigners who have good relationships, and of course, however, we've heard a lot more stories that have ended in tragedy. So in other words, of course, we do know some people who've had good relationships between foreigners and Japanese people, but we know a lot more, and it happens all the time. We meet people, Japanese people, who say, oh yes, I had a foreign boyfriend. He went back to America. I had a foreign boyfriend. He went back to Germany. I had a foreign girlfriend. She went back to Australia. and then of course we do meet people. Usually people who are divorced here don't talk about it terribly much, but usually we know because they're close, either friends of friends or sort of close enough to us that we'll know. And oh yeah, she used to, you know, she used to be married to a French guy, but you know, he went home, and now she's just got the 2 kids, and he went home. And we get a lot of stories like this all the time, you know. Yeah, you know, she was married to a foreigner and he went home. He was married to a foreigner and she went home. Or the person's still in the country, but they've split up and they live separately. Or they do live together, but it's hell, and that's really common. That's really, really common. If you do come to Japan and spend time in Japan and meet foreigners in Japan who are married, quite often you'll hear a lot of horror stories from them, because it's really, really difficult, which is what we're going to get to in a minute. So first piece of or suggestion or observation is, you know, if it's your fantasy, then you know you might want to rethink it, because it's really, really difficult. Then something we just touched on just now is the going home thing. The first thing that you're going to come across is one of you is going to have to give up your home. One of you is going to have to give up your country and your family and your friends and give up your home. And it's all very easy to say, oh yeah, I could do that, when you've spent a week in Japan or a month or a year or 2 years. But because it's all very fun and exciting for that first period of time. But then as time goes on, you know, you're a long way from your family and friends and your old country and your old way of living, your old way of life and your culture and everything else. And of course, so either you have to give up your country and your family and your friends, and I mean, unless you're really, really rich and you can afford to go backwards and forwards between the countries all the time so that you can spend time in both countries. But I mean, for most of us, that's a fairly expensive proposition, and we can't afford to do it all the time. So one of you has to give up your country and your family and your friends and live in the other country forever. If you're going to get married, and have kids and have a normal marriage, well, one of you is going to have to give up your country. And who's that going to be? So that either has to be you. If you're the foreigner, that has to be you, or it has to be the Japanese person. And you know, that's a really difficult thing to do, of course. And that's another way we often hear these things end. Oh, she married a foreigner and she went to live in his country, and after 2 years or 3 years or whatever, she came back, and you know, he stayed there and she came back to Japan and started over again. And it's because, you know, living in Japan long term, the statistics are that most foreigners that come to Japan with the intention of living here long term don't. Most people that come here for a year on a year visa usually go home within the year. Most people that come here with the intention of living here forever usually go home within a much shorter period of time. So, you know, the statistics are that most foreigners that come here don't stay here forever. So, you know, if you get married, well, what's going to happen when you don't stay here forever and you decide to go back? And because that's sad when you hear that story. You know, she went and lived in Switzerland with her husband for 2 years or 3 years, and then she couldn't handle it, because it's hard. It's hard for foreigners to live in Japan for all the reasons we talked about on the how-to playlist. All the cultural differences, the language differences, and everything else make it really difficult to live in Japan, for a foreigner to live in Japan. There's a lot of great things about it, of course, but there's a lot of difficult things as well. And for some people, the good things outweigh the bad, but for most people, the majority of people, long term, they don't, and they go back. No matter, and I'll tell you, oh, I love Japan, but you know, I'm going to go back and live in my own country. Very common story. And if you happen to have a wife or a husband, you know, who's Japanese, what are they going to do? They're going to come with you, because for Japanese people, it's equally difficult. And we meet a lot of Japanese people say this as well. I lived in Europe for 2 years, and it was really good, but you know, I was really happy to come back to Japan. For the same reasons, the cultural differences is that, you know, the person who's used to living in Japan, and then, you know, a Japanese person who's used to living in Japan and goes trying living in Europe, you know, they'll find it difficult. The foreigners living in Japan might find it difficult to see 3 children standing up in the back of a car. Incredible, isn't it? It's actually against the law in Japan, but they do it anyway. So, yes. So, yes, and our point to this lady was, that if you're going to have any chance of making it work, the relationship work, if you do manage to get over that one of you giving up your country thing, and I mean, some of us are happy to, you know, some of us feel that we've enjoyed our time in our own countries and we've sort of had enough of that, and we're happy to be starting a life in a new country, and after, you know, a long period of time, we're still happy to continue doing that. It does happen sometimes. So if you're lucky enough to be one of those people who it does work out for, and you're happy to live here permanently, then the other thing that's going to be absolutely essential is the communication, and that's the thing we're talking about with this lady, because it's really difficult. I mean, in most relationships around the world, it can be difficult, can't it? You know, men and women communicating with each other can always be a difficult thing, can't it? For a whole heap of reasons. But when you've got the Japanese foreigner thing going on, it adds another level of complication, because the way Japanese people communicate about things and the way a lot of foreigners communicate about things is really different, and that can be a real problem. Trying to just to talk about difficult topics can be a real challenge, really difficult. So we're going to talk about that. Probably will need another video or two to talk about a few of the different aspects that will come up. But it's really difficult, you know, and even the foreigners here that have managed to survive it and are married and sort of have reasonably good relationships, they'll still, and boyfriends and girlfriends and things, and they'll still tell you that it's really difficult, and there'll still be things that they don't talk about with their partners. And that's another point too. It's Japanese people, there's some things they just won't talk about. There's some things that they just don't think you should talk about if there's nothing to be gained. I mean, one example that comes to mind is that most Japanese people assume that if you're married, that one of you or both of you is going to cheat at some stage, and it's sort of accepted as just part of the deal. But if you do cheat, cheating's not such a bad thing as long as the partner doesn't find out. So the essential part of the cheating thing is that the partner doesn't find out. So that it's considered generally, this isn't always the case of course, but it's generally considered in Japan that cheating is sort of it's accepted, not acceptable, but it's an accepted reality that's what people do as long as their partner doesn't find out. And of course in some cultures, you know, if you do cheat, then the correct thing is to then go to your partner and say, look, I have to be honest with you, I cheated, and then work it through from there, and if you're lucky you'll get away with it because you were honest about it. Whereas in Japanese way of thinking is, if you do the wrong thing like that and cheat and then tell your partner, you're rubbing their nose in it. So talking about cheating is not on. Any form of jealousy at all is not on. It's okay to be jealous about somebody who's gone on holidays. If your co-worker goes on holidays to Hokkaido or Nagano or something, you can say, oh, I'm so jealous, and they'll love it. That's the right thing to do in Japan. But being jealous of relationships is a big no-no. And of course in most countries being jealous isn't considered to be a cool thing to do, but it's sort of accepted that, you know, if the partner does something really naughty, that the other person's going to get jealous. And of course they will, it's natural. Whereas Japanese people don't say that. There's no excuse for jealousy at all. And the way the relationships are, the way the relationships go is quite often people in relationships here lead really separate lives, you know, like it's quite common for one partner to go off to another city and catch up with some friends and stay in a hotel there for a couple of days and come back, you know, a couple of days later, and it's really uncool to ask any questions at all about it. So it's like, okay, bye, have a good time, and when they come back a couple of days later, oh, did you have fun? Oh, that's great. End of story. And if they volunteer any sort of tell you about it, then that's okay, but asking questions is not cool. So here's an example where some people from some cultures will want to talk about things like that. You know, oh look, I'm cool about you going away for your 2 days, but how about telling me who you're going to meet and who you're going to spend the time with and what you're going to do? And, you know, in a lot of cultures that would be considered to be an acceptable trade-off. You know, going off and doing that for a couple of days is fine, but, you know, I want to know sort of where you're going and who with would be a reasonable sort of expectation. Whereas in Japan, you wouldn't want to ask that, because they'd be saying, what's your problem? Why are you so insecure? So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, that's just one small thing of a million things, right? But I mean, to some people, that could be a huge thing, couldn't it? For some people, to have to deal with that. And I'm not talking about once. You know, maybe your partner wants to do that once or twice a year, or 3 or 4 times a year. I know someone here whose wife goes off probably about once every 2 months, goes off for a couple of days down to Osaka and spends a couple of days in Osaka, and no idea what she does there, no idea who she goes with, who she meets there, what she does, anything else. Nobody asks, nobody talks about it. It's like, see you later, have fun, and then when she comes back, did you have fun? Yeah, that's good, okay, end of story, no more discussion. So that's just one little thing, guys, but of course to some people that's going to be a huge thing, isn't it? And this is another thing, is that a lot of the stuff that is really, really important to people from other cultures is not important at all to Japanese people, and vice versa. There's a lot of things that aren't important to people, for some people from other cultures, that are really important to a lot of Japanese people. And that can be difficult too, where we're saying it doesn't matter, and they're saying it does. You know, it's hard enough to have friendships here, real friendships. For a foreigner to have real friendships in Japan, it's really rare. Quite often people leave messages on our videos and say, I've got lots of Japanese friends, and they tell me my good Japanese friends, and yeah, maybe they are. But the cultural difference is so huge, it's really, really hard to have close relationships when you've got such huge cultural differences. So again, just the main point of this video is, you know, don't do it. And if you're going to go into it with your eyes wide open, and try it out first, because before you rush into getting married, and this is one we've seen before too, people try and shortcut the visa process, because the Japanese visa system is pretty tough. And a spouse visa, if you marry a Japanese person, a spouse visa is a really convenient thing to have, because it gives you a whole heap of freedom. But, you know, hurrying into a marriage to get a visa is a really stupid thing to do, of course. And even if you don't really care about getting married, the divorce has a real social stigma in Japan. It's not a religious thing, of course, right? There's no religious hang-ups about it. It's just a bit of a social stigma to being divorced. People don't talk about it too much, or at all. And then, of course, if you have kids, you know, and you leave one partner in Japan with kids on their own, you know, it's a terrible thing to do to someone. So even if your attitude towards marriage is, oh, well, I can give it a try and see how it goes, I'll get a spouse visa, live in Japan for a while, see how it works, and if I don't like it, I'll leave. And the reason I'm putting it like that is I've heard this story. I've heard foreigners talk like that, and I've also heard Japanese ladies tell the sad story, you know. And it always starts the same way. I had a foreign boyfriend, or I had a foreign husband. Though I had a foreign husband is not so common, because again, there's the stigma attached to the divorce thing, so that they don't, unless you're really close to them, in which case you know the story already. They don't talk about that one so much, but the boyfriend one's really common. I had a foreign boyfriend, and you know the next bit's going to be tragic, because they're talking past tense already, aren't they? I had, you know, tragic, and it does tend to be more Japanese guys, Japanese girls with foreign guys, just because of the cultural difference. The style of the average Japanese guy doesn't sort of usually appeal to foreign girls as much, and not always the case, of course. I mean, again, we do know foreign girls that are married to Japanese guys, so it does happen, and you know, sometimes it works reasonably well, but again, usually not. I mean, and again, all the cultural reasons. So no doubt there's a whole heap of stuff we can talk about with this, so we probably will do another video or two about it. Also, we've got some discussion going on amongst a group of people here who are sort of have experience of this, so they've got a few ideas as well. No doubt people have some questions and comments as well. So again, all generalizations. Usually with videos like this, people say, you know, oh, that's not true, I know somebody. Well, that's good, that's fantastic if you know somebody who's got a different story, and that's good too. But these how-to videos, really, these ones about the relationships as well as the other how-to videos, really are just a heads up. They're a bit of a heads up to give you a bit of an idea what to expect, because our thinking is if you know what to expect, it'll make it that much easier when you hear, when you're actually here experiencing things for real. If you've experienced them or heard about them already, we think it will give you a bit of preparation. It won't catch you off guard as much, because from experience, you know, most people will tell you if they knew before they came here what it was going to be like, or if they knew about this before it happened, or if they knew about this before it happened, they would do it differently. And you'll hear married people here say, if I'd known what it was going to be like, I wouldn't have married her, or I wouldn't have married him. And you know, and usually it's not just that person's fault, it's almost always cultural. Almost always, not always. So like all the how-to videos, it's a heads up just to let you know, and also just some observations based on what we've seen, the examples we've seen of this and how that's worked out. So some observations and some ideas based on that. That's all this is. Take it or leave it, you know. I know lots of people will just leave it. We hear this all the time. We try and sort of let people know, and they go, no, I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, that's fine. It's just a heads up, you know, take it or leave it. So anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.